Imagine for a moment that you're sitting in a Parisian cafe in the 1950s, watching people pass by the window. There's something melancholic about the way some of them always walk alone, carrying a loneliness that seems to emanate from within themselves. Albert Camus, the philosopher of the absurd, would have recognized in those faces something profound about the human condition. Today we're going to explore 5 dark traits that, according to Camusian philosophy, destine certain people to perpetual solitude. This isn't about judgment, but about understanding existential patterns that shape our relational destinies. The first dark trait that Camus would identify in people destined for solitude is the inability to accept the absurd nature of existence. These people live in constant search for an ultimate meaning, an absolute truth that justifies every moment of their lives. They are those who incessantly ask why they are here, what the purpose of everything is, expecting a definitive answer that never comes. Camus taught us that life is fundamentally absurd, that there is no cosmic reason for our existence, and that beauty lies precisely in accepting this condition and creating our own meaning. But these people reject this acceptance. They become bitter when they realize that the universe owes them no explanations, that there is no instruction manual for life, that each day is an improvisation on the stage of existence. This refusal to accept the absurd places them in a position of constant dissatisfaction and resentment. They are too critical of life and other people, always expecting everything to make perfect sense. In relationships, this manifests as excessive demands for explanations, for reasons, for justifications for every gesture from the other. They cannot simply be present in the moment, living the experience of love or friendship without questioning every detail. This attitude suffocates others, who feel constantly judged and evaluated under a lens of existential analysis that makes any spontaneity impossible. The person who doesn't accept life's absurdity is always looking for flaws in reality, always dissatisfied with what is offered by the world and by people around them. Camus would say they refuse to dance with life, preferring to sit in the bleachers criticizing the music. And so, gradually, everyone moves away, leaving them alone with their unanswered questions and their sterile revolt against the absurd nature of existence. The second dark trait is the refusal to embrace their own freedom. Camus, influenced by existentialism, understood that we are condemned to be free, that at every moment we make choices that define who we are. But there are people who flee from this responsibility, who prefer to live in bad faith, blaming circumstances, fate, other people or society for their decisions. They are experts in victimization, always finding someone or something to blame for their unhappiness. In relationships, this manifests as suffocating emotional dependence and a tendency to transfer all responsibility for their happiness to the other. They expect their partner, friend, or family member to solve their existential problems, to fill the emptiness they feel, to make difficult decisions for them. This attitude is deeply destructive because it transforms the other into a kind of savior or emotional crutch. The free person, according to Camus, is one who takes full responsibility for their choices, even knowing there are no guarantees they will choose correctly. They understand that freedom is both a gift and a curse, but embrace this condition with courage. Those who flee from freedom become emotional parasites, always draining others' energy, always expecting someone to tell them what to do, how to live, how to be happy. They live in a constant state of anxiety, because deep down they know they are running from themselves, that they are denying their own existential autonomy. Over time, people around them tire of this dynamic, of this excessive responsibility imposed on them, and begin to distance themselves. The person who flees from freedom ends up alone because they never learned to be company for themselves, never developed the capacity to make autonomous decisions, and live with the consequences of their choices. The third dark trait is the obsession with eternity and the inability to live in the present. Camus taught us about the importance of the here and now, about the need to embrace the temporality of human existence. He rejected both escape to a utopian future and the paralyzing nostalgia of the past. But there are people who constantly live outside the present moment, always projecting themselves into an idealized future or lamenting a past that is gone. They are incapable of genuinely connecting with others because they are never truly present in the relationship. During a conversation, they are thinking about what they will say next, about how the situation should be different, about how things were better before. This temporal disconnection creates an invisible barrier between them and other people. In romantic relationships, they are always comparing their current partner with past loves or fantasizing about an ideal future love. They can never simply be there, in that specific moment, experiencing the encounter with another human being without the interference of time. Camus deeply valued immediate sensory experience, the ability to feel the sun on one's skin, to savor a coffee, to look into someone's eyes and be completely present in that gaze. For him, eternity was not somewhere distant, but in the intensity of the lived moment. People obsessed with eternity lose this intensity, always living in function of something that is not the now, and this makes them frustrating and unsatisfactory companions. They are like ghosts walking among the living, never managing to fully connect with present reality. Over time, others perceive this absence, this inability to be truly present, and begin to seek companions who know how to value and intensely live each shared moment. Now leave a comment telling us which of these dark traits most resonates with your personal experience or with people you know. Your reflection might help other viewers better understand these existential patterns and perhaps even recognize them in themselves. The fourth dark trait is the inability to create their own values, always living according to values imposed by society, family, or tradition. Camus showed us that in an absurd universe, we must create our own values, our own ethics, our own way of giving meaning to existence. But there are people who never develop this creative capacity, always living as echoes of others, automatically reproducing behavioral patterns they never questioned or truly internalized. They are like actors playing a role they never chose, following a script written by others, never discovering who they really are when social masks are removed. In relationships, this manifests as fundamental falseness, an inability to connect authentically because they themselves don't know who they are. They change personalities depending on the social group they're in, always trying to please, always seeking external approval to validate their existence. Camus despised this inauthenticity, this life lived in bad faith, where the person hides behind social roles to avoid confronting themselves. The authentic person, according to his philosophy, is one who has the courage to question everything, to examine their own values, to consciously choose how they want to live, even if it means going against others' expectations. They don't need constant approval, because they have an internal moral compass, built through reflection and lived experience. Those who always live according to others' values become empty people, without substance of their own, always changing opinions depending on the social wind. They are incapable of taking firm positions, of defending their own viewpoints, of truly committing to someone because they don't even know what they're committing to within themselves. This inconsistency and lack of authenticity gradually drives away people who seek genuine and deep relationships. Nobody wants to fall in love with someone who changes personality at every encounter, or build a friendship with someone who has no convictions of their own. The fifth and final dark trait is the refusal to accept suffering as an integral part of the human condition, constantly fleeing existential pain through distractions, addictions, or denial of reality. Camus didn't romanticize suffering, but understood that it is inevitable and can be transformative when faced with lucidity and courage. The Camusian hero is not one who avoids pain, but one who faces it head-on, who finds ways to continue living despite it, who transforms suffering into fuel for a more intense and meaningful life. But there are people who dedicate all their energy to avoiding any form of emotional, psychological, or existential discomfort. They live on life's surface, avoiding deep conversations, fleeing situations that might awaken them to their own vulnerability, building increasingly higher emotional walls to protect themselves from the possibility of being hurt. In relationships, this manifests as an inability for true intimacy. They cannot open themselves completely to another because that would imply the risk of suffering, rejection, disillusionment. They prefer superficial, safe, predictable relationships where there is no space for the emotional intensity that characterizes genuine human encounters. Camus taught us that loving is always an act of courage because it involves accepting the possibility of loss, pain, disillusionment. Authentic love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability always carries with it the risk of suffering. But it is precisely this risk that makes love valuable and meaningful. People who flee from suffering can never truly love, nor be deeply loved, because they are not willing to pay the emotional price that any meaningful relationship demands. They remain on the periphery of human experience, watching from afar the intensity that others live, but never allowing themselves to fully dive into the experience of encountering another. Over time, this defensive attitude completely isolates them, because other people perceive their emotional unavailability, their refusal to truly engage, and naturally turn toward those who are willing to live with greater depth and authenticity. If you've made it this far, it's a sign that you're truly interested in understanding these profound existential patterns. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming content about existentialist philosophy applied to everyday life. When reflecting on these 5 dark traits identified by Camus, we must not fall into the error of using them as instruments of judgment, but rather as mirrors for our own self-understanding. Solitude, from the Camusian perspective, is not necessarily a punishment, but often the natural result of existential choices that distance us from authenticity and genuine connection with others. Each of these traits represents, fundamentally, a form of flight from existential responsibility, a way of avoiding the courageous confrontation with oneself that authentic life demands. Camus invites us to embrace our absurd condition, not with resignation, but with a vibrant affirmation of life, even knowing it offers no guarantees or definitive answers. The person who accepts the absurd, embraces their freedom, intensely lives the present, creates their own values, and faces suffering with courage. This person may be physically alone at times, but will never be existentially isolated, because they will be in full communion with themselves and open to genuine encounters with others. The true solution to these destructive patterns lies not in superficial behavioral changes, but in a profound transformation of the relationship we establish with ourselves and with existence. As Camus would say, we need to learn to be our own best companions before expecting others to want to join us on this absurd and wonderful journey that is human life. Solitude ceases to be a curse when we understand that it is often the temporary price we pay for refusing to live in the inauthenticity and bad faith that characterize these dark traits.